Oh, the feeling of moving into a new apartment with the person you love. There's no feeling better in this entire world. After about 5 or 6 months of dating, me and John, the love of my life, decided to move in together. We were more than ready and above all else, more than excited. Since the moment we talked about it, we've been hunting for apartments left and right. It didn't take long, and we finally found what we were looking for. It was a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment in a good part of town, and above all else, it had 2 parking spots. One for me and one for John. This was a rare commodity in our city since there were so many cars and virtually half of that number were parking spaces. Anyway, we talked to the landlord, and before we knew it, there we were. We were standing right in the middle of our new apartment. He couldn't believe it. "This is a special occasion. I think we should celebrate," John said, and I agreed with him before I kissed him. "Wait here, I'm gonna go get something," he told me before going into one of the bedrooms looking for God knows what in our luggage. "Hold this glass, baby," he told me. John came back with 2 glasses and a bottle of expensive champagne. For us and our future together. I toasted before sipping on the champagne. Everything was perfect. We were both doing really well. He had an office job working for a big firm as an attorney. This meant that he had a pretty big salary, but the downside was that he was most of the time at work. I missed him so much each time, but I knew it meant a lot to him, so I couldn't say anything. My job was a little bit different than his. First of all, I was working from home. Actually, I could work from anywhere in the world. I was a freelancer, designing logos and websites. I used to have a corporate job, but then I got into design, and I quit. Never looked back, and I've never been happier. Actually made more than I used to. Anyway, we drank the champagne, unpacked, and went into the bedroom. To be honest, we were making quite a lot of noise, but it wasn't late. It was about 9 p.m. or something. While we were, doing our thing, we could hear something. It was like something in the wall, like a scratching or something. First, we thought it may be some sort of animal blocked in there, but the wall was solid. How could the animal even go into the wall? While we were talking about the noise, the weird sound stopped. "What's up there?" I asked John. "It's a vent." "This is weird. Why would a vent be in the bedroom?" "Maybe it's for the air conditioning," he told me. "It was really high up and we couldn't reach to see what's up with it." John needed a ladder, but unfortunately, we didn't have one that night, so he decided to check it out in the next couple of days when he would buy one. Anyway, the night went amazing, and before we knew it, we had to wake up and go to work. John woke up earlier than me, but I could hear him, so I opened my eyes just as he was dressing in his suit. I told him he looked good, and then he leaned over and kissed me. It was so romantic. Our lives finally began to take shape, and from the looks of it, it was going to be amazing. Before he left for work, he told me that he made coffee, and it's in the kitchen, and also he told me another thing. He was going to be late tonight. He had a difficult case he needed to take care of, and he would be home only after 11 p.m. "Don't wait up for me. You go to sleep. Oh, and make sure you eat," he caringly told me. "Of course I'm going to wait up for you. You're not going to sleep without a goodnight kiss," I replied. Then he was out the door. I slowly got out of bed and drank my coffee. The day went on as usual. Talked with some of my clients, created some drafts, cleaned the house a little. It was pretty normal. As I was working on a project at around 8 p.m., knowing that John was going to be late, I heard the front door. Jumped out of my chair thinking it's John. The big smile on my face, I went into the living room and I watched how the doorknob started turning. But something was odd. The doorknob was turning, but he wasn't coming in. The door being locked. "John?" I asked from the other side of the door. No answer, so I asked again. "Did you forget your key?" After I did that, the doorknob stopped turning. Instead, Loud banging on the door scared me so bad that I took a few steps back. "John," I screamed, but the banging became louder and louder. It was like the door was coming off its hinges. Realizing that he told me he'll come home after 11 p.m. and it was only 8, I knew it wasn't him. It was an intruder. Someone was trying to break into my home. The next thing I did was to grab my phone and dial 911. "Hello. Someone is trying to break into my home. I'm alone. Help me," I told the officer on the phone. He said that someone will be there shortly and I should stay on the phone. Shortly after, the banging stopped, but I remained on the phone. After that, someone knocked at my door. Freaked out again, but the operator said it was a police officer. So I slowly opened my door and he was right. I told him everything that happened. He checked around the building and couldn't find anyone. He advised me to stay inside with my door locked until my husband comes back. John finally came home and he was surprised to see me up at that late hour. "What happened? Why are you shaking?" he asked while grabbing my hand. "Someone tried to break in." I was so scared and I called the police. Said to him. Fortunately, nothing else happened that night. The next evening, he came back early at around 6 p.m., which was something rare for him. We had dinner and it was a quiet night. The next day, he was supposed to work late again. It was 10:30 p.m., and I heard the doorknob turn. I called the police immediately, and as soon as I started talking with him on the phone, the banging on the door stopped. They came as they did on the first night and couldn't find anything. The same thing happened the next night as well. I felt like I was going insane. "Ma'am, are you sure someone was banging on your door?" the policeman asked me. He started to think that I was imagining things. "Yes, I'm not crazy. Someone tried to break into my home 3 times. I yelled at him, but then I apologized for getting so angry. The weekend came and finally, John wasn't going to the office. He was home with me all day. At around 8 p.m. on a Saturday, he saw that we were out of pasta. "I'm going to the store down the street to get some pasta. I feel like eating some delicious carbs this evening," he told me. Also had a craving for pasta, so off he went. After about 15 minutes, my doorknob started turning again. Then, as usual, the banging started. I freaked out and called John. He came back running from the store, and what he saw on our main door made his blood run cold. It was a photo of me pinned to the door. The photo had a big X marked on my face. More shockingly, we saw that the door of our next-door neighbor was half open. None of us had the courage to go in there and investigate. Shocked and frightened, we called the cops. The police, on investigation, found several photos of me and my neighbor's drawer. Each photo had blade and knife marks on it. However, there was no sign of him and his belongings. Apparently, this man was living alone since many, many years. Nobody in the building knew what he did or where did he go. The police promised me that they would give us a call if they find any leads. We haven't heard from them yet, but John and I have been very cautious since then. So this all happened to my best friend back when she was like 15, way back in the mid-2000s. We live in rural Alabama, like right out in the middle of the sticks, and one Friday night, her dad gets a hankering for a basket of Royal Reds. They want to head out, but they also couldn't get a sitter at such a short notice. This suited my BFF, who was saying how she didn't need a babysitter, that she was basically a grown-up and could be trusted to be left home alone for the night. Her parents agree, but tell her she better be in bed and asleep by the time they get home, which'd be sometime after 11 p.m. If she wasn't, she'd be grounded, but if she was, her mom told her that she'd take her shopping the next day. Pretty sweet deal, right? Home alone and a shopping spree. I'm swooning just thinking about it. Anyway, it comes the night of her parents' little dinner date. They give her some money for pizza, and she basically has the time of her life, watching whatever she wanted on the TV, pigging out on pizza and ice cream. She had the entire place to herself. All she had to do was be in bed by like 11:15, and she'd have herself half a whole new wardrobe. So the time comes, and she has the whole kitchen clean and tidy, ice cream away, pizza boxes chucked in the trash, and she's all up in her PJs. Mission accomplished. Then out of nowhere, she hears the front door to her home open and close, and footsteps down in the hallway. So she jumps into bed, turns off the lights, then lies in bed with her back to the bedroom door and pretends to be asleep. Sure enough, she hears her parents climbing the stairs quietly, shushing each other and giggling as they went. Obviously, they've been a little too liberal with their drinks, and in hindsight, maybe that's why they wanted her to be in bed by the time they came home, so she wouldn't be able to poke fun at them for being drunk. Anyway, she's still lying there, not making a sound, when she hears the handle of her bedroom door begin to turn. They're obviously checking to see if she's actually asleep, so she lies real still and doesn't make a sound. Then, whoever it was who opened the door, either her mom or dad, they start creeping across the carpet towards her. Then, when they reach her bedside, they lean over, stroke her hair a little, then give her a kiss on the side of the head. That confirmed that they had been drinking because all she could smell was booze as whoever it was crept out of the room. And then there was silence again. Mom and Dad must have just gone right to bed to sleep off their margaritas because she barely heard a thing after that. Maybe some stumbling to and from the bathroom. But apart from that, silence. She's actually kind of sleepy by that point, so she just lays there, drifts off, then wakes up bright and early the next morning, ready for her shopping trip reward. She rolls over, checks her phone, only to discover she has a bunch of texts from her mom, all timed for an hour or so after she'd fallen asleep. She opens them, half expecting a bunch of "You're an amazing daughter, I love you, XOXO" drunk texts. But in her half-asleep haze, what she reads makes no sense to her whatsoever. The message reads something like, "Honey, I'm sorry if we worried you, but we saw Aunt Barb and her new boyfriend, and we totally lost track of time. We're staying in a motel tonight, but we'll be back tomorrow around 12, promise. Then we can go to that shopping trip." I can only imagine what that must have been like at the time, but my friend said the information was a square peg and her brain was a round hole. It just wouldn't fit. Her parents had come all the way home, then gone back out again. But why? She texts her mom like, "Did you come home last night?" And as she does, she said she felt her heart begin to pound in her chest. Because if she said no, she was either lying, or it wasn't either of her parents in the house the night before. It was a complete stranger. As soon as that horrible penny really dropped for her, she called her mom in a panic, who obviously then told her to call the cops ASAP. But when they got there was nothing to tell them how this stranger had gotten in, if anything was taken, or how they'd gotten out. My friend swears that she'd heard the front door close quietly, but if that was the case, how did the guy get a copy of their front door key? Even scarier is their security cameras didn't record anyone walking up their driveway, and there's literally no other way to get to the front of the property without being caught on it. It 100% wasn't some kind of dream either, because someone had evidently, and very quietly, gone through her mom's clothes at some point during the night. No one was ever caught over it. The cops didn't even have a suspect, and I don't believe my friend would just make something up like that. Like she was really actually upset about it for a really long time, and unless the whole thing is an elaborate cover story for something else, then it really did happen. It just freaks me out thinking the guy is still out there, and that he's that good at being a creep, that he can do all that stuff and stay totally undetected. Just the thought of it makes my skin crawl. I turned on the TV to break the silence. I was the only one at home. My parents went for a function. I would have stayed over at a friend's place if I had known earlier that my parents would be late. I went to prepare something to eat before I went to sleep. The light in the kitchen flickered, and I froze. It stayed normal, and I continued what I was doing. A sound made me drop the bowl I was holding in fright. I went to peek out the window, hiding behind the curtain. Only saw a cat. I scolded myself for being too jumpy. I ate my meal, watching reruns of Family Guy. The lights flickered again, and I hugged my knees to my chest, watching the lights as it came on and off. I said a silent prayer that the power should not go out, and held my breath in anticipation. The lights stayed on, and I sighed in relief. Though it was just getting dark, it would be worse if I had to stay alone in the dark. Our house was situated farther from the other houses in the neighborhood, so there was a higher chance of not being able to get help in time. My dad was a politician, so I was used to them having to go out. A shadow passed the side of the house, and I jumped. Calmed myself down, thinking it was just the cat. The time was 8:24 p.m. People would be in their homes, doing whatever it was that people did in the evening. Another shadow passed, and I frowned. That shadow was too big for a cat. My ears perked up. I could hear voices. "Who's there?" asked, my voice shaky. The voices stopped abruptly. Then came a knock on the door. I remained seated, glued to the sofa. I was sure the door was locked. My heart started to beat faster, and I got very scared. "Who is it?" I squeaked. "Open the door, dear. We just want to have a quick discussion." It was a man's voice. I didn't know who it was. I was in trouble. I didn't know what to do. I just stared at the door in fear, wondering if this was how I was going to die. The person at the other side of the door rattled the handle and cursed loudly. "No one's here to save you. The sooner you open this door, the better," another voice said. Crap, there were two of them. Now my heart went into overdrive. I stood up on rubber legs and crept to the kitchen. I picked the pepper spray and a kitchen knife. I held out the kitchen knife in one hand and the pepper spray in another, my hands trembling. The door started to shake as something heavy hit it continuously. I gasped. They were going to break in. I had only watched things like this in the movies. It had never been a personal experience. The door gave way and two masked men stormed in. When I saw that they had guns, my arms became as limp as noodles. The knife and pepper spray fell to the floor, clattering. I opened my mouth and screamed. The shorter one slapped me, effectively shutting me up. He covered my mouth with duct tape. After tying me to one of the dining chairs, they made their way across the house, stuffing our valuable things into their duffel bags. I spied the knife I had dropped on the floor about 2 feet away from me. I hopped on my chair, trying to move it closer. I stopped when they came back to the living room. "Where's all the cash?" the taller one asked. I shook my head. I didn't know where my parents kept their money, probably in the bank, like all smart people. When he asked me, and I shook my head, he hit me with the butt of the gun. The duct tape muffled my scream. The shorter one stood over me while the other man went inside. I eyed the knife, trying not to make it too obvious. The man watching me grew bored and began to walk around the living room. He took a vase and put it into his duffel bag. He didn't notice that I had inched closer to the knife. Used my toes to carry the knife up, my face staring straight ahead. My toes lost their grip and the knife clattered to the floor. The man's head swiveled to me. He shook his head when he saw the knife. "Pesky little girl, wasn't going to hurt you before, but now you're just begging for it." He walked up to me and I tried to move away. I only managed to move the chair a few inches before he grabbed my hair and wrenched my head back. He slapped me and I tasted blood in my mouth. My eyes watered from the pain. He slapped me again, clearly enjoying himself. "Phil, what are you doing?" the other man asked as he came back to the living room, his duffel bag full to the point of tearing. I spied some of my mom's jewelry hanging off the sides. Phil's grip on my hair tightened. She was trying to break free. I had to teach her a lesson, he said. Phil asked if they had stolen enough, and his partner replied that the jewelry he took must be worth a fortune. I knew they were. My mom was in love with shiny things. My dad was all too happy to pay for it. He loved his wife and always did his best to keep her happy. We have what we want. Leave her. Let's go. Phil hit me again before they left, dragging their bags behind them. Phil waved to me before closing the door behind them. That was the last thing I remembered before darkness took over. My parents said they found me like that, unconscious on the chair. They had left the function in a hurry when one of our neighbors called to ask if they knew the men leaving the house. The police were already looking for them. I had no information to give them. They wore their masks throughout. I was taken to the hospital. I had never gone through anything as scary as what I went through the night before. My parents took me to see a therapist who helped me deal with the trauma. I developed anxiety if I stayed alone for too long. It wasn't long before my parents hired a bodyguard for me. Since that day, I have been consistently trying to let go of the fear and troubled thoughts. I know it is only a matter of time, and I would be able to put the nightmarish incident behind me. However, it is not that easy. I grew up in a single-parent household, just me and my sister, and my mom, with my grandpa, occasionally lending a hand with parenting duties. And when I was about 4 or 5 years old, we were broken into twice. I didn't know all the details of the whole thing until years later, like I have vague memories of moving apartments and some cops coming over to the house. But I was pretty much kept in the dark until I was old enough to handle what had gone down. For the first break-in, we were all out grocery shopping, so my mom didn't realize anything had happened until we got home. There was an open window, open drawers. The way my grandpa tells it, it's like my mom interrupted them in the middle of doing something, and they climbed out of a second-floor window as soon as he'd heard us arrive. That, or whoever it was, just didn't care about people knowing he'd been there. The second break-in happened 3 months later. Only this time, the guy broke in at nighttime while we were all asleep. I had to get all this from my grandpa because, understandably, my mom hates talking about it, but the way he tells it, she basically woke up in the middle of the night and sensed a presence in the room with her, not like a spirit or anything dumb like that, like an actual person. Then, when she opened her eyes, there was someone standing next to her bed with something shiny in his hand. She told Grandpa she was literally frozen with terror, couldn't move, couldn't talk, literally petrified in the very sense of the word. Apparently, the guy was mumbling something, but Mom couldn't remember exactly what. Then, by the time she started begging him not to hurt her, she couldn't hear anything at all. My sister remembers walking into her room, thinking that she was having a nightmare. She asked Mom if she was okay. Mom threw the cupboards from over her head, saw the guy was gone, then noticed the second-floor window was open where the guy had used the same escape route as the first break-in. She put my little sister back to bed. Obviously have no memory of this because I was asleep. She called 911. Then she called my grandpa. Grandpa said the cops found faint, muddy footprints all over the house, including in our bedrooms. So he'd obviously taken his time exploring the place before he'd woken my mom up. Only, this guy hadn't just been exploring. He'd been very, very busy. And it actually took us a few days to uncover all the bizarre little things he'd done, things which spoke to just how insane this person really was. The next day, when we noticed that the cat wouldn't touch her milk, Mom poured it out into the sink, thinking that it had gone sour, then got the distinct smell of bleach as she did so. She can't be certain, but she thinks the guy poured bleach into the cat's milk, wanting to kill it. Then, there was the cracked, empty eggs in the fridge. Not like cracked all the way, just little holes in the top with all the yolk and egg white missing. It's possible he just poured them down the sink, but Grandpa thinks the guy might have been sucking them raw. Not all that scary, I know, just freaky, you know. Mom says some meat was missing from the fridge too. Raw meat. But I know Grandpa used to feed our cat from the fridge too, so we can't rule that out. A few days later, Grandpa came over in the evening for some dinner and offered to help prep for garbage day. He says one of the garbage cans spilled right as he got into the driveway, complains to my mom about tin cans in the garbage or whatever, and then goes on to clean up and finds what spilled it. Someone, presumably the guy who broke in, had thrown a pair of scissors in the trash, along with a clothing catalog he'd been cutting up. He cut the heads off almost every single model in that catalog, and the little paper heads were nowhere to be found. My grandpa thinks the guy took them as some kind of trophy, but who knows what he really did with them. Then there was the salt in my mom's work shoes, the knife missing from her knife block in the kitchen, obviously the shiny thing he'd been holding when she woke up to him in her room. Anyways, the cops got plenty of fingerprints, but whoever it was didn't have a record, and other than the muddy boot prints they'd found, there was nothing much to go on. So to this day, no one's been arrested for it, but my grandpa thinks he knows who it was. Years later, after we'd moved apartments twice in a bid to avoid the guy, a friend of a distant relative ended up getting locked up in some kind of psychiatric hospital. The guy had become obsessed with Alice in Wonderland, had all the books, multiple copies of them too, and all he ever talked about was the Looking Glass or Wonderland, and all this stuff. It might just be a complete coincidence, but the thing is, that's my mom's name, Alice. She's over the whole thing now. It's been more than 20 years since all of that, but I know that if she doesn't like talking about it, even today, it had to have messed her up for a while.